Fox News Alert now, a new reaction to one of the largest immigration enforcement raids in our country's history. Welcome back to America's Newsroom, brand new hour. I'm Sandra Smith.
And I'm Bill Hemmer. Smitty, good morning to you. ICE raiding food processing plants in Mississippi, rounding up almost 700 undocumented workers. The DA's office assisting with warrants to execute those sweeps. Here's the U.S. Attorney Michael Hurst on how that went down.
The United States of America is the greatest nation in the history of the world. And it's no wonder that people from around the world want to come here to our country. But while we do welcome folks from other countries, they have to follow our laws.
Steve Harrigan has more on this story, picks it up from Atlanta, Georgia today. Steve, good morning.
Bill, good morning. ICE officials are calling this the largest single-state series of raids in the workplace in history. As many as 600 agents were involved. The target mainly chicken processing plants in small cities around Jackson, Mississippi. Now, the timing was difficult. It happened in the hours before President Trump arrived in El Paso to mourn the murder of 22 people there, gunned down in part because they were seen as Hispanic immigrants. Immigration officials were quick to say there was no connection between the raids and the attack in El Paso, that these raids were planned up to 1 year in advance. As for the raids themselves, the agents surrounded the perimeters of the factories and the chicken processing plants. They checked people for proof of residency. Those without proof of residency had their hands zip-tied behind their back, their personal belongings placed in clear plastic bags. They were put on buses and taken to an airport hangar for processing. Some were arrested for crimes. Others will be deported almost immediately. And still others, depending on humanitarian reasons, could be released with ankle bracelets.
I'm told those who were detained initially and released for humanitarian reasons are being shipped back to the point from where they were detained. So whether it be Canton or Bay Springs or Morton, if they are being released by HSI for humanitarian reasons, they will be put in the same situation they were found this morning.
Another difficult detail about these raids in some of the cities that occurred on the first day of school. That meant that some parents were separated from their children while the children were at school. This created some real sadness, some confusion, even some panic. This small girl said her father was taken away.
I want to say something to my dad because they're not doing nothing to my dad. They're not doing nothing bad. So I want my dad to be free and everybody else. And those children are crying because of their dad and mom missing. I don't want my dad.
Communities in Mississippi were scrambling to try to do what they could to help, especially the children. One gym opened its doors to shelter some of those children, and bus drivers were told not to drop children off at home unless there was visible proof of a parent actually being home. If no parent was home, they were to be taken back to school. Immigration officials were clear that they were targeting not just illegal workers here in Mississippi, but also targeting companies that knowingly hire them. Bill, back to you.
Thank you. Steve Harrigan on that story today from Atlanta. Sandra?
For more on all this, let's bring in Tom Homan, a retired ICE director and Fox News contributor. Tom, thank you for being here. Can you add to what we are hearing about this raid, one of the largest single-state raids in our country's history?
Well, a couple of things. When I was ICE director, I directed the increase of worksite enforcement by 400%. And HSI actually surpassed that about 420%. And they're continuing that work today for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's a magnet that draws the illegal aliens to our country. If they think they can get here and get by the Border Patrol and get a job, they keep coming, which of course is not only one of the reasons our border is out of control, it also puts themselves in harm's way to hire a criminal organization to smuggle them. 31% of women are being sexually assaulted. Children are dying. We got to pull these magnets away. But on this specific operation, something your other reporter didn't talk about, this is a criminal operation. People need to understand that. We're talking about identity theft. We're talking about tax evasion. It's illegal. It's a violation of criminal statute to knowingly hire an illegal alien. It is a felony to conceal and harbor an illegal alien in your premises. So this is a criminal investigation that's going to help a lot of U.S. citizens whose identity has been stolen, their credits have been ruined by illegal aliens using their Social Security numbers to get employment.
How do you respond to that little girl we just heard from? Through her tears, Her father was taken away in this raid. She said, my dad didn't do anything. He's not a criminal. It pulls at your heartstrings when you hear that.
You know, it does, and I've done this with, over 3 decades. And look, immigration enforcement is always controversial, is emotional. But you know what? The blame needs to be placed on her father. Her father came to this country illegally. He brought his child here illegally, whether he brought her here illegally or she was born here. He put his family in the position of being here illegally in violation of our laws. He should have took better action to protect his family. But let me explain what ICE does in an operation like this. If he's a sole care provider, he's a parent, there's no other parent available or any relative available, he will be released on an ankle bracelet to go home and take care of his child. No child can be left unattended. If there's another parent there, the dad may stay in custody. If there isn't, he'll be released. ICE, during their interviews, all these employees are asking, one of the first questions going to ask them, is there children at home under the age of 18? Where are they? How can we contact them? So ICE does an awful lot to make sure these kids are taken care of. Again, it's sad. Separations happen all the time. It happens to U.S. citizen families when American citizens get arrested. They get separated. It's unfortunate. It's sad, but you can't blame the men and women of ICE who are enforcing laws enacted by Congress. And for Congressman Castro to come out and say this is about hate and a fear message to immigrants, he needs to read the very laws Congress enacted that makes it a crime to knowingly hire illegal aliens.
Let me get his words in here so you can respond further. Here is Joaquin Castro's statement on these ICE raids, saying, quote, let's be clear, ICE raids of this scale are not conducted for the purpose of immigration enforcement. They're to strike fear in our communities in a time when Latinos are already living in terror. Continue with your response to Joaquin Castro.
He is wrong. He is so wrong. This is about enforcing the immigration law. This is about laws that Congress enacted. I think Congress is in the habit of creating laws, enacting laws they didn't want to enforce. As a lawmaker, he needs to do one thing. He needs to go back and read the very statutes that Congress wrote about illegal immigration and hiring illegal immigrants. He's a lawmaker. If you don't like it, change it. But don't vilify the men and women who strap a gun to every day to do the job that Congress expects them to do.
I want to end with this criticism from Donna Brazil, former interim chair of the DNC. She joined us last hour, I should say 9 o'clock hour, and said this.
I woke up thinking about the little children in Mississippi who are getting up this morning without a parent, through no fault of their own. I know their parents may be here, with no documentation, but still they have nobody to bathe them, to comb their hair, to send them off to school. And yet, did the owners of that facility, were they arrested? Were they arrested?
You address that, Tom?
Yes, the owners are under criminal investigation, absolutely. And like children, I said earlier, ICE will make sure the child has some sort of daycare provider. But
they're under investigation, or were they arrested?
This is a criminal investigation. They're going to have to prove the charges in district court. But let me end with this: that if the message we want to keep sending the rest of the world is, come to the United States illegally, get a job, and because it may be sad or unfortunate you get separated from your child for a time while you're being processed, if that's the message we want to send, that we're not serious about enforcing immigration laws, you're never going to solve the border crisis. More women are going to be raped, more children are going to die, and criminal cartels get richer, the same cartels that have murdered Border Patrol agents. So you can't have it both ways. Either we enforce law or we don't. Non-enforced law means open borders, and this country doesn't want open borders.
So just to be clear, I'm sorry to harbor this, the owners of the facilities, were they taken as well?
I do not know that for sure. I can tell you that what I know, this is a criminal investigation that started on identity theft, tax evasion, harboring. So if they can prove a case against them, they will be charged. I mean, almost all worksite investigations start as a criminal investigation and ends with a prosecution of those who knowingly hire illegal aliens.
I know that we will be digging into this and find out a lot more in coming days. We appreciate you coming on to react this morning. Tom Homan, thank you.
Thank you.
Another alert, new report from the Pentagon now showing ISIS gaining strength again in Syria. The president insisting on removing U.S. forces from that theater. Former CIA Station Chief Dan Hoffman spoke with us a bit earlier today about that report.
The president has drawn down some of our capacity in Syria, and the question for the administration is this the right amount of roughly 1,000 troops with some intelligence capacity? It's always challenging when we outsource to foreign actors.
Pentagon reporter Lucas Tomlinson picks it up from there. Lucas, what do we have?
Bill, at a press conference yesterday afternoon, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said he had not read the report, but didn't appear too worried about ISIS.
This administration is incredibly mindful of the success we've had versus ISIS and the challenge that it continues to present to the world. We understand that the threat from terrorism, more broadly than just ISIS, continues to exist in the world, and we're doing all the right things.
The new report warns ISIS is coming back in Syria and returning to its insurgent roots in Iraq. At a refugee camp in northeast Syria, there are 45,000 ISIS supporters and family members with minimal security watching over them, according to the Pentagon's report. It also states, quote, the Iraqi military lacked the hold forces in areas recaptured from ISIS, and U.S.-backed fighters in Syria also lacked personnel. 10,000 ISIS fighters remain detained in Syria, but many countries are reluctant to take back the foreign fighters. Last night on Special Report, Britain's new top diplomat issued the following warning.
Are you worried that ISIS is making a resurgence?
I think the one thing we've learned about Islamic-based militancy, terrorism from Al-Qaeda through to Daesh is that you cannot take your eye off the ball. But I think we're unlikely to see extra troops deployed in that area.
The U.S. military has cut roughly half its forces in Syria and wants other countries like the U.K. to step up. Now, that doesn't appear to be happening. The report also warns of an increased threat from Iran. Yesterday, in a separate warning, the Pentagon said Iranian forces are jamming the GPS devices aboard commercial vessels in the Persian Gulf to lure them into Iranian waters. Bill?
Thank you, Lucas. Lucas Tomlinson for the Pentagon there. Sandra.
A Trump donor speaking out in an attempt to shame him for backing President Trump.
He wasn't just publishing a list of donors. He was hoping that they would be discombobulated or harassed or whatever, etc. And I just think we all have a right, we have in America a right to free speech.
Meanwhile, Congressman Joaquin Castro is still defending the move. We will tell you how the president is now firing back this morning. Wall Street Journal's Kim Strassel is on deck.
Also, the shootings in El Paso and Dayton reigniting the push to do more on guns in America. President Trump says he supports more background checks, so will then both sides put aside the rhetoric and actually work towards significant change. We will hear from the 2020 campaign on that coming up next.
So we will sit down, we will think clearly, because that's what the people expect us to do, and we will look at the ways we can make society safer. I support what the president is doing, trying to bring Congress together to look at these issues. Many of those are federal issues. Background checks, can they be strengthened? I think there's support for that if it's done correctly, not only by gun owners, but the general public, Republicans and Democrats. The red flag laws are difficult. You have to be very careful that you're not taking away someone's rights while also being sure that people who shouldn't have guns in their hands do not have those guns.
Texas Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick there saying he is open to new gun reform laws floated by President Trump already. And we're learning that the president did speak to NRA Chief Wayne LaPierre on Tuesday. Mark Ladders, Director of Strategy Communications for Trump 2020. Mark, good morning. Have you been given any information about what was transpired on that phone call?
Not specifically as it relates to that phone call, but it's not unusual for the president, as he is considering and weighing various policy options, to hear from all sides on these issues. And obviously, something like this, the NRA would have a communication and a thought on those issues. So it makes sense that the president would also hear from them as he is considering all of these options.
What are you hearing about willingness on the part of the president and Republicans to come forward and show their willingness to change some gun laws in this country?
Well, I think as the president said, there's a great appetite, especially on the red flag laws, because look, we've already had examples where these kinds of things have worked. I go back to See Something, Say Something, post 9/11, and I'd even add friends don't let friends drive drunk. We have it in our heart in America to be able to reach out when we see someone close to us that may be going down a dark path, or we see something out of place, notifying the authorities and then letting that process play itself out. I think that's what the president's talking about here, and if we can stop somebody from going down that path, being a threat to themselves or to other people, I think it's something that a lot of people would take advantage of, and it could save lives.
Well, there's a lot of discussion about where the two sides can potentially come together to enact some sort of change. Senator Chris Coons was on Fox News earlier today and said this.
We need to find ways to legislate together. And the president's leadership on taking real steps on background checks will be critical. Both the governor of Ohio, Mike DeWine, the congressman from Dayton, Mike Turner, and the Republican senator from Ohio, Rob Portman, have now stepped forward and called for more decisive action. There is legislation we can take up and pass.
Which leaves the big question still, what can be done? And where does the discussion need to be politically to keep guns out of the hands of individuals like the killers in both Texas and Ohio over last weekend?
I think the president is taking the right approach, that there is no single thing that can be done. We have to do an all the above. The president has already taken strong action to strengthen and close loopholes in our background check system, and more may need to be done, and he's willing to have that conversation. But when you add red flag laws and then the other things that the president has done, like banning bump stocks, we can work together on this, but the mental health side has to be a part of this discussion. We've got to get out of this partisanship that blames politics for what's going on right now, because anytime we're not blaming anyone other than the shooter, we're doing ourselves a disservice and just trying to score cheap political points.
While some are calling for bipartisanship in the wake of those shootings, a couple presidential candidates, the frontrunner Joe Biden and Beto O'Rourke, saying this week.
As the sitting president, Trump's anger, hate, and divisiveness, pitting Americans against one another, the epidemic of guns, is fueling a literal carnage in America.
How worried are you that with Donald Trump still in the Oval Office, something like this will inevitably happen again?
It will happen again.
He says it's going to happen again if the president remains in office. Biden talking about in response to that.
I mean, this is absolutely shameful. This was a day yesterday where the president was trying to bring our nation together. There are reports now coming out where the president was down on one knee so children could hug him while they were visiting hospitals. And you heard, obviously, even the mayor of Dayton talking about the warm reception and the love that he received and the First Lady received. And for them to take partisan shots on a day when we're trying to come together, it's just cheap. And it's not even true what the vice president was saying. And as opposed to the former congressman from Texas, I mean, this is just blatant scare tactics that the left always tries. It's not going to work. Let's stop it with this and get back to trying to heal and come together rather than tearing people apart.
Our thoughts remain with all those communities still trying to heal this morning. Mark Lauder, we appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thanks, Sandra.
In the meantime, there are developments this morning on a new Hollywood movie that depicts the killing of Trump supporters. Will The Hunt still be released even after the mass shootings in El Paso and Dayton? We'll have a look at that in a moment.
Introducing the all-new Chevy Silverado. With 50 industry firsts, it's the strongest, most advanced Silverado ever.
Oh my gosh, wow. Who am I?
Wow, is that really me?